Hello and welcome to the Football for Kids podcast with me, Darren Rees. In this episode, we are going to be talking about the Scotland and Manchester United player, Scott Mctominay. Before we get into the episode, a few of your shout-outs, messages and your Apple Podcast reviews. The first shout-out goes to Max Myers, who is a massive Liverpool fan and would love for me to do an episode on Darren Rees. Max is also a super listener on Patreon, so a massive shout-out to you, Max. Thank you for being a listener. I will get Darren Rees done in the not-so-distant future, and I really hope that you enjoy this episode as well. The next one says, Dear Darren, my name is Jacob and I am 7 years old. I live in Nairobi, Kenya. My favourite teams are AC Milan, Real Madrid and Manchester United. Well, Jacob, hopefully you'll like this one then. I play for a team called Green Sports Academy. We love your podcast and we listen to it every night before bed. Can you do an episode on Di Maria? And that is from Jacob, who lives in Kenya. Well, Jacob, a massive shout out to you. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode on Manchester United Scott Mctominay. And don't you worry, Di Maria has been on my list for a long time and I will get an episode done on him in the not so distant future. And lastly, before we get into this episode, thank you to everybody who's been leaving 5-star reviews on Apple Podcast and on Spotify. I just want to read one out before we get going, and that is from Master Matt 2000. It says amazing podcast and gives it 5 stars. It then says, Hi Darren, my name is Matthew and I'm 12 years old. I live in Germany and my favourite team is FC Bayern Munich. Me and my brother, who is 9 years old, listen to your podcast all the time before bed. Could you please do a podcast about Manuel Neuer and the FC Bayern Munich team? Thanks so much for a great podcast from Matthew. Matthew finishes his podcast review with, P.S. Please could you subscribe to my YouTube channel? It's called Master Matt 2000. Well, there you go, Master Matt 2000. Thank you very much for being a listener. Thank you for your 5-star review. And all the listeners can go and check out your YouTube channel now. Right then, let's get into this episode about the fantastic, about the marvellous, about the brilliant Scott Mctominay. Scott Francis Mctominay was born on the 8th of December 1996 in Lancaster, England. Although Scott was born in England, he is eligible to play for the Scottish national side through his father. Scott, like almost all the players we have spoken about on this podcast, was kicking a ball about from pretty much the moment he could walk and kick his legs out. Scott was playing for one of the local sides when he was really young. Some of the top football scouts were known for going around the local area, and if they thought they'd seen a kid with talent, then they would approach one of the child's adults or the football coach of a team. This is exactly what happened with Scott when he got picked out to play for Manchester United's youth academy. Scott joined the youth academy at just 5 years old. Scott would travel from Lancaster in the northwest of England to Preston 3 to 4 times a week to do his training. He was able to do it because his parents would always take him without any questions asked, and the journey there and back was well over an hour. Scott knew how lucky he was to have such dedicated parents. Dream stuff for a kid who just loved football. Scott Mctominay made his way through the youth academy at Manchester United. He gave it everything he had at every moment of every training session and in every game. But he had a bit of a challenge when he was growing up, and that was he was a late developer in terms of the speed he was growing at in comparison to the other kids. Even when he was in his late teen years, Scott would be one of the, if not the, smallest players on the team. Some of the kids who Scott was playing with at the same age as him had pretty much fully developed, which made this even harder for Scott to compete. Scott would have conversations with his 6'2" dad about his height and wanting to be bigger. Scott's dad would give him a boost of confidence and tell him that he would grow, he'd just have to be patient. Manchester United were always good to Scott, and they gave him every opportunity to fill out and grow into the player they knew he could and would be. Oh, and by the way, Scott's dad wasn't wrong. Scott is now 6'3". If you're a player worrying about your height, just think about Scott Mctominay. Something important to learn and understand about Scott's story and other players' stories where the player was signed to a monstrous club at a young age is that just because they are playing for a club like Manchester United, it does not mean that they get things easy. If anything, the players who play for these clubs have it really tough. They have to work harder than you could ever imagine because everyone else around them is giving it everything they have in every training session and in every game. If they don't, then, well, they may not continue in the team or make it to the first team one day. Scott never stopped trying and, most importantly, he never, ever gave up. In the 2016-2017 season, Scott, after all of his years of hard work and graft, got called up to play for the Manchester United senior team in the Premier League against Arsenal. Over the years, Scott has made many appearances for United, working wonders on the pitch. His ferocious, no-nonsense style wins him the ball and constantly creates options for the team. There are a couple of games in particular that Scott really stood out for United, which was when the Red Devils were in the Champions League in the 2018-2019 season. There was a game against PSG and there was a game against Barcelona. Scott was on fire in those games, and the pundits across Europe couldn't believe their eyes, and they couldn't hide their excitement for what a fantastic player he was. In the following season, Scott scored his first goal at the home of Manchester United, Old Trafford. Stuff of dreams for any player. Never mind one who had been with the youth academy since the age of 5 years old. Scott is a regular player for Manchester United these days. He's earned his place and has done wonderful things on the football pitch for the club. But the other team he does great things for is, of course, Scotland. Scott played for Jose Mourinho when he was at Manchester United. And in 2018, Jose Mourinho suggested to the new Scotland manager that he should select Mctominay for the Scotland squad because it looks like England is missing him. It's also reported that legendary Manchester United football manager Sir Alex Ferguson was also very keen for Scott to represent Scotland. In 2018, Scott Mctominay made his Scotland debut in a game against Costa Rica. A proud moment for him and, of course, for all of his family. Scott continued to play for Scotland in the build-up to the Euro 2020 tournament, and he helped them with their qualification. This turned out to be Scotland's first major tournament in over 20 years. Scotland have once again qualified for the Euros, and they will be in the 2024 tournament in Germany, starting in a group with Hungary, Switzerland and the hosts Germany. And as long as Scott is fit to play, you can guarantee he'll be doing the business on the pitch there. So, from being a little dot at 5 years old joining the Manchester United Youth Academy, to worrying about not being big or strong enough, to scoring at Old Trafford as a senior player and representing Scotland in one of the biggest tournaments on the planet. Scott Mctominay is the proof in the pudding that if you stick with something, if you believe in yourself, if you work your socks off, and if you never, ever give up, anything is possible. I hope that you've enjoyed listening and learning about the story so far about the terrific Scott Mctominay. And remember, if you know someone who loves football just as much as you do, then please tell them about Football for Kids. And whether you're playing football soon, watching it on the telly, or pitch side, I hope that you enjoy the game. See you next time.